evening. We're thankful that you're here tonight. We are happy to have this big of a crowd on Tuesday night. I tell you, I thank you for making this a priority and being here, and it just makes me happy. And I tell you, it's an encouragement to everybody who's here to be able to look around and see so many people here. So thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me once again. Just enjoyed this week so much, and I hope that as we get near the end of the week that our study of God's Word has been a blessing to us, because anytime we open the Bible, it ought to be a blessing. And so I'm thankful that you've invited me to come and preach, and just thankful to get to know all of you better, and look forward to being together in the future, if not here on earth in eternity. And that's what it's all about. I was blessed tonight by seeing somebody I hadn't seen in a long time, and that's Joan Canales. She said she was baptized at this church, and she was at Florence Boulevard when I was there, and her family, and her daughter Becky was in our youth group, and so she just came in and she said, "Do you know who I am?" and told me her name right off, and I was thankful because I didn't know. I knew her face, but I couldn't pull up her name, so I was so thankful to see her, and I know many of you probably already know her, but thankful that all of you are here. If you're visiting tonight, we're especially excited that you came from somebody's invitation to be with us for this study. Let me again thank you for the food tonight. We enjoyed the Pioneer class before worship tonight, and so enjoyed the fellowship and the meal together, and so thank you once again for that. I tried not to eat as much so that I could breathe a little bit better than I did last night, so that's the challenge sometimes. Tonight we're going to talk about the need to serve. And when we talk about being the people that God would have us to be, I think that service comes to mind when we think about what the church ought to be doing. We can't help but think about the life of Jesus and think about the fact that He even stated the fact He did not come to be served, but to serve and give His life a ransom for many. So we know that Jesus was all about teaching service to those followers of His, and He taught it by word and He taught it by deed. And so when we think about where we ought to be and what we ought to be doing, service is one of those things that ought to be who we are and what we do. Now, there are times where we miss out on opportunities. And one of those times I'm reminded of is when I saw this cartoon in a church bulletin. And if you'll imagine and picture this with me, you have a lady who is in a bed, very sick and distraught. You can tell she's in pain. Just from the expression on her face. You have a lady named Florence who is visiting her, standing in the doorway, and it shows the picture of the surroundings. She's in the bed sick. Over here next to the bed are 2 or 3 piles of dirty laundry. Over on this side of the house, you can still see the kitchen, and the kitchen has dishes stacked up in the sink that need to be washed. She has 2 children running around there that look like they hadn't had a bath in several days. And some of the pets are just running wild through the house. And Florence, as she visits with her and gets ready to leave in this cartoon, she says these words, "Please let me know if I can do anything for you, and I'll be glad to." I think sometimes that's exactly how we go about life, is the fact that the obvious is right there in front of us about opportunities to serve, but we don't really see those opportunities. We don't think about doing for other people. And that's why I want to suggest to you as we begin the study tonight that we all have to be proactive when it comes to service. We can't sit back and wait on an opportunity to come our way and knocking on our door, or somebody to give us a phone call and say, "Hey, I need this or I need that," because like we said the other day, it's very rare that people will actually call you back if they're in need. So we need to be people who have the eyes to see the need of those around us. And so many times we miss opportunities, those small opportunities every day to serve others. And so I think that God has made us in such a way that we feel this need to serve. There's so many people that aren't Christians in the world that will volunteer their time at the hospital. They'll volunteer their time for some cause of raising money for research for maybe a disease. There are people out there that dedicate their time to some sort of thing that serves others because they just feel that need to serve. And I think that God has intentionally put within all of us this desire to serve somebody in some way. And sometimes we don't know exactly why we're going about it until we read about Jesus, until we read about the instructions that we've been given about service. And then it kind of clicks with us. We realize we serve because we have a God that also served. And He showed us the way to service. And not only that, but we do that not for our sake, but for the honor and glory of our Father. And we want Him to get all the glory for all that we do. And that's why Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, when you do your charitable deed, don't sound a trumpet, don't let everybody know what you're doing, but do it in secret. And we know that some things in serving others are in secret, anonymous maybe, but other ways we can't help but people to know about it, but that shouldn't hinder us from serving as well. So tonight as we talk about being servants, let's first of all notice as we look into Luke chapter 10 and a few other places, the fact that when we think about service, it's about meeting others' needs. That's what it means to serve, is to see a need and meet that need. When we think about that, serving is about being available to others. And that's hard for us sometimes because, again, we're so busy these days, we have so much going on, and we tend to not be available at the time and at the place that we need to be available to others. Service is not that hard once we know what the need is, right? If it's feeding somebody, we can do that fairly easily. If it's getting somebody to a certain place that they need to be in travels, we can do that. But a lot of times it's just, first of all, being available and recognizing the fact that there are people around us in need. The early church in Acts 2, they acknowledged the needs of those around them, and they sold their possessions and they gave to those who were in need. And I think that that's where it started. They saw the needs of those around us. And that's what we need to do as well. And so when you start thinking about service, you have to start thinking about the fact that, like we talked about last night, when people are going through a storm, when there's difficulty, that presents an open door for service. And we even said, if it weren't for times of trouble, there would never be an opportunity to serve. And so when we start thinking about being available to others, we have to be like Jesus was, because He surely was. We read about that in Matthew chapter 15, and I invite you to turn with me to a couple of these places. Matthew 15, you have Jesus, really a little overview passage here of what His work was in that particular area. Matthew chapter 15, beginning of verse 29. Here it says, Jesus departed from there and skirted the Sea of Galilee and went up on the mountain and sat down there. Then great multitudes came to Him, having with them the lame, the blind, the mute, the maimed, many others. And they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and He healed them. So the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed made whole, the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they glorified the God of Israel. Now we understand that Jesus went about doing good, and part of the good that He did was that He made Himself available to all manner of sick people. He was helping those who were lame. He was helping those who were blind. He has a list of those different ailments that people had, and they came to Him, and He healed them. Now we know that it wasn't just about making them whole physically. He wanted to make them whole spiritually. But at the same time, we see that He was available to serve them and meet the need of the hour. He didn't say, well, to the blind, you need to know about God. He wanted to heal his condition so that he could see God, that he would know who God was based on that power that He was giving him. And that's the way we open the door, folks, to converting people, is we serve. We help show them the love of Christ as we go about life, and they see that in us, and they want to do like we are in the sense of serving God and giving ourselves over to Him. Different way of living. And it's unusual today because the majority of the people in the world today want to be served, don't they? And let's be honest, we all like being served, don't we? When we go to a restaurant, we like to have our tea glass refilled. We like for our food to be brought to our table in a timely way. I mean, it's kind of nice sometimes to be served. But at the same time, the feeling that we get, the satisfaction, again, that need within us when we serve others is something that we can't describe, really, is it? Because we know when we've helped somebody, when we've done a good deed, that just makes us feel so good, doesn't it? And God designed us that way to where when we did do something like Jesus did, it makes us feel very satisfied in that act of kindness. But let's think about it from this standpoint. So many times we talk about service projects, we talk about mission trips, and all those are good. But let's realize that service is not an event, it's a lifestyle. And I see this sometimes with groups that I've been on in the past, and even at Stony Point. What we'll do is we'll go on a mission trip, and we've gone on 2 or 3 this year. And what we'll do is we'll prepare for that trip, and we'll get ready to go, and we'll make our plan as far as what we're going to do when we get there. And once we take off in that car or on that plane or whatever, I always say our antennas go up. You know, now we're on mission. We're looking for people to help. We want to teach somebody the gospel. And so our antennas are up and we're ready to go out there and you know, we just start talking to people about Jesus, and we start inviting them to Vacation Bible School or whatever the event is that we've gone to help with. And then once the week is over, we get back on the bus or back on the plane, we go back home, the antennas go back down, we go back to our old way of life, right? We're no longer on mission. One time I asked Stony Point folks, I said, how many missionaries do we have here today? We had a couple of people that we might consider professional missionaries. They raised their hands. The other folks didn't. And I said, everybody should raise their hands because we're all missionaries. You know, we're missionaries to our little part of this world, wherever we are. And we have to keep that in mind. And so that's what I'm saying. Sometimes we do ourselves a little disservice in having a service project or having a mission trip, because we kind of get the idea that that's when we start to serve or that's when we start to do mission work. But it's a way of life, folks. That's what Jesus did. Everywhere He went, He helped others, He served others, He taught others. And that's the example that He's left for us, is to be on mission, to make sure that we are servants all the time. And again, it's about being available to people, to make sure that you are aware of needs around you and that you make yourself available for those people and for those needs. You may have heard about this guy named George Phillips from Meridian, Mississippi. He was locking up his house one night, ready to go to bed, and he looked out the back window of his house and he noticed that the lights were on in his shop out back. And he asked his wife, he said, have you been out to the shop? And she said, no. He said, the lights are on out there. And so he looked a little closer and he saw a couple of images moving in the shop. And he knew what was going on. Some guys were trying to steal all of his stuff out there. And so he quickly calls 911 and he says, hey, we've got a couple of guys over here who are robbing us right now. And the police officer said, well, we're a small police station here. We've only got a couple of officers and they're real busy right now. And we can't make it. So, you know, let me just say, stay in your house and try not to put yourself in danger. And we'll try to get there as soon as we can. He said, well, okay. He hung up the phone. He waited about 2 minutes and he called him back. He said, hey, don't worry about coming out here. I went out there and shot both those guys. In about another minute, here come all these police cars showing up at his house. And they go out to the shop and they find these guys and they arrest them. And they start to take them to the car, and there's George. And they said, I thought you said that you shot these guys. He said, I thought you said you were unavailable. So, you know, when it comes to being available, sometimes we're not as available, or we're more available than we claim that we are sometimes. You know, there are times where we just need to wake up and just open our eyes to realize, hey, there are people hurting around us. And instead of doing something for me today, let's do something else for somebody else. Wouldn't that be great? A great way to serve and use your day in a very effective way. And so just being available to people is really big when it comes to service. And so when you look at Luke chapter 10, another one of those texts that you can't help but think about when you think about service, and this guy, we call him the Good Samaritan here in Luke chapter 10. Now, when we think about this situation, you have 3 different guys who pass by a fellow who is in need. And we know this story, and we won't read it again just for the sake of time, but this man who had fallen among thieves, here he is, beat up and bleeding and definitely needing somebody to help him. Then you have a priest, you have a Levite, and you have a Samaritan, all in succession, coming to that particular location. They see the fella in his condition, and the first guy's a priest, and it says what about him? That he passed by on the other side. Kept on going. The second guy, a Levite, he comes and he looks at him, the text says, and then he passes by on the other side. And then the Samaritan, he looks at him and he has compassion on him, is what the Bible says. And he goes and he binds up his wounds and he puts him on his own animal and he takes him into town. They check into an inn and he stays all night taking care of this man. Stranger. He doesn't know him, but he just knows he's in need. And so the Samaritan, we call him the Good Samaritan because of his actions of service, because he was available for this guy. Now let's back up just a moment. The priest and the Levite, we give them a really hard time when we read Luke chapter 10, don't we? We look at them as the bad guys in one sense. But are they really bad guys? I mean, he's a priest and a Levite. I mean, they're good guys. They're serving in the temple. Matter of fact, the reason we might just speculate here that the priest, maybe even the Levite, did not stop to help this man is because maybe it was their time to serve in the temple and they needed to get to that particular location sooner than later. You know, it was one of those things where of course they didn't have watches then, but they would do that now and say it's time for me to get there. But whatever the case is, these two men are not bad men. They were just unavailable for that particular man, in that particular setting, that particular day. And I wonder so many times how many times I'm the priest or I'm the Levite. Because are there not situations in front of us, and we debate whether or not to get involved, we debate whether or not to help, and we talk ourselves out of it a lot of times, don't we? Well, maybe somebody else can help them that's got more time. Maybe somebody else can help them that's better at it than I am. We went into Wendy's one Wednesday night to eat before Bible study, and it was me and Christy and one of our kids, and we got in line, and there was this older lady who was in line in front of us. And there was a couple other people in front of her. And while we were waiting, she turned around and said something about the weather or something to me. And so we struck up a conversation. And we talked for just a few moments before she gave them her order. And after she ordered, then we ordered. And we really enjoyed talking to her just briefly there in line. And I went and sat down with my family. And I happened to look over and I saw this lady sitting by herself. And I thought to myself, there just for a moment, she's by herself. Wouldn't it be great if we invited her to come over to our table and eat with us? You know, she may be lonesome. Maybe she wants some company and doesn't have anybody. So those thoughts went through my mind, and somebody said something at the table, and I lost track of that thought. And then a little bit later on, I noticed that she got up after she ate and went on to her car. You know, and I felt kind of bad about that. I kept thinking, this was a missed opportunity for me to just do something good for somebody else. And what did I fail to do? I failed to act. And I wonder if we're like the priest and Levite sometimes, that we just fail to actually follow through with what we maybe even have an intent in our heart to do. And so let me encourage you tonight as we begin this lesson, as we start to think about meeting the needs of others, let's just start thinking about how can we be more available to people around us. How can we be mindful and recognize those needs, and again be proactive, not pushy or not coming on too strong, but just simply going about our lives trying to meet those little needs as we have opportunity. Folks, I believe God places people and opportunities in our path every day for us to do good. And so many times we have blinders on. We're so busy going where we're going and doing what we're doing that we fail to just pay attention. And so let's use this as a wake-up call, me included, and let's see if there's some person that we can help, some person that we can make a difference in serving and helping meet their needs in some way. because that's what we're supposed to do. When you think about it, this saying came up one time, and I think it's true. But saved people serve people. That's who we are. That's what we're to be about. If we're to be disciples of Jesus, if we're going to be like Him, like we talked about Sunday, then we're going to be people who serve. Because that's one of those calling cards of a Christian. That's just automatic, that's what we do. That's who we are. It's not an event, again. It's not something we do on occasion. It's who we become. It's our way of life as we go about life every day. So first of all, the need to serve, that need that God has put within each one of us is to meet the needs of others. But it also comes back our way as well. And when we think about the need to serve, it's also meeting our needs. And that goes back again to what we just said about the fact that within all of us, I think God has placed this desire to serve. Now, we've already looked at John 13 once this week about Jesus washing the disciples' feet. But I want you to notice verse 17. We didn't make it that far when we were talking about it. And I've always found this very interesting. After Jesus washes their feet, and after He begins to talk to them about the importance of serving others as He has done to them, He also says these words in verse 17. Blessed or happy will you be if you do these things. Jesus is giving us the secret to happiness here. He's telling us how to be blessed people if we actually do these things, if we serve. And if you think about it, who are the happiest people on earth? Are they the ones that have everybody doing stuff for them? I mean, think about it. We had a little illustration that we used a few weeks ago in a sermon about Tom Brady. Most of you know who Tom Brady is. All you women probably know who Tom Brady is. He's a nice-looking football player. You know, he's quarterback for the New England Patriots. He's got, 7 Super Bowl rings now. And he was being interviewed by a fellow from, I believe it was 60 Minutes. And he asked him, he says, how does it feel to have all these Super Bowl rings, to be married to a model, to have all this money and notoriety? He said, how is it? He said, to be honest with you, I look at my career and I look at these Super Bowl rings and I say, is this all there is? And you can watch that interview and you can hear him say those very words. Is this all there is to life? Surely there's more to life than this. And the interviewer was stunned, I think, in him saying that. He said, well, what's the secret? He said, I wish I knew. You see, this guy has accomplished so much. He has people around him serving him all the time, and yet he's empty in a part of his life. He says, this doesn't fully satisfy me. There's got to be more to life than this. And here he is at the top. I mean, most of us would love to be in his spot. Millions of dollars and everybody knows your name and all that. But he says, no, there's got to be more to life than this. And I think, again, Jesus is telling us what that secret is, what that more to life is. And that is our true happiness comes when we allow God to use us for the purpose for which He placed us here. And that's to be a servant to those around us, to spread the gospel. But we spread the gospel, folks, a lot of times by simply loving people first. I always tell people you can love people into the church a lot easier than you can browbeat them into the church. You've got to love people. You've got to show them a genuine concern. And they'll notice that, and they'll respond to that. And so service is so important. It lays the groundwork for so much more in the church. And I think that's what we see in the life of Jesus. He went about healing people many times before He even taught them anything about the Word of God. And so you see the fact that we follow that same pattern. We can teach others simply by first serving them and opening that door. And so here in John 13, He reminds us that service is what makes us really happy. That brings about that satisfaction that we're looking for in our lives. And so God has designed us to serve, even again, though it's contrary to our nature, contrary to our world in which we live. And that's why we need to continue to trust in God to do it His way and not try to seek the world's way. Now here in Mark chapter 10, you have a situation with a couple of the disciples of Jesus. And this is one of those occasions where Jesus is teaching his followers that it's not about being served, it's about serving others. And greatness in his kingdom is about serving. And so let's notice this together, starting in verse 35 of Mark chapter 10. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left, in your glory." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am going to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They said to him, "We are able." And so Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink the cup that I will drink, and with the baptism I am baptized with, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left hand is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. Whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." So here's an occasion where James and John, they come to Jesus and they say, "We want you to do for us whatever we ask." That's a loaded, statement, isn't it? Okay, tell me what it is. Jesus knew what it was ahead of time, but they said, "We want to be on the throne with you, one on one side and one on the other." And remember, several times the disciples were arguing among themselves, and Jesus asked them what you were arguing about, even though he already knew. What was the argument? Who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? Who's going to be the greatest? Well, the whole point here that Jesus takes this opportunity to make is it's really not about being great by sitting on a throne. It's being great by serving. Instead of sitting up above everybody, it's kneeling before everybody. It's on the other end of the matter that greatness comes. And so he uses this occasion where these two men make this request. By the way, if you read another account, their mom's involved too. That mom comes and asks for that as well. But when you think about what Jesus is trying to convey to his followers, and he's trying to teach us that tonight too, folks. He's trying to get through to us that if you want to be a great person, if you want to be somebody significant, if you want your life to count here on earth, then you're going to be a servant. That's really where the difference is made. And that's where we find fulfillment again when we do that. It's not sitting on the throne commanding others. It's not about being great in the world's eyes. It's about being humble before a mighty God who will exalt us in due time, who will bless us when we serve in that way. And so when we think about going about service, we ought to be people that take the words of Jesus literally. And we exercise that wherever we go. I don't know how many Chick-fil-A fans we have in here. I have to be careful saying that back at Stony Point because we got a KFC guy in our congregation. And he thinks they're the competition. I say, it's two different kinds of chicken. You're all right. Both of y'all are doing good. All right, so when you think about Chick-fil-A, some of you may know that they are very religious, people as far as their owners, their leaders. And Dan Cathy is the owner of Chick-fil-A, CEO. And he is one of these guys that has taught all of his employees to leave a place better than they found it. That's kind of their motto. And so in one particular city, they were building a new Chick-fil-A restaurant, and Dan Cathy and his project manager were in town checking out the progress. They were looking at this new Chick-fil-A building, and they went all through it. Of course, they got a little dusty and dirty, and they got hungry. Well, they're not open yet, so they go across the street to Taco Bell to eat. And they go across over there, and they go into the restroom to wash up from being in the construction zone. They go in there, and both the men wash their hands, and they get ready to go out. But the project manager looks back, and Dan Cathy has some more paper towels, and he's wiping down the sinks and the counters. And the man looks back, and he says, "What are you doing?" Mr. Kathy? Why are you cleaning up the competition's bathroom? And he said, I teach our employees to always leave a place better than they found it. And so he is doing exactly what he teaches his employees to do. He teaches them to serve, to go the extra mile, to go beyond what is required. And I think that's a good example of what that means every day. It means you just do a little extra here and there. You take advantage of an opportunity just to do a little something more than what the normal person would do. You know, and that's what service is all about. It's just going about thinking in those terms and thinking, what can I do today to be a servant, to help somebody, to help a situation to be better. And, you know, when you think about it, Jesus definitely wants somebody that humbly goes about that service. It's not about, look at me, look at what I'm doing. You know, there were times when I was a kid, I always wanted people to see what I was doing. I think y'all probably felt that way at one time or another. Some of us have never grown out of it, have we? All right, so when I was in the gym dribbling the basketball, I thought, well, I'm going to shoot this half-court shot. And I got the ball ready, and I dribbled it a little louder where everybody would look over at me, you know. And before I shot, I would look to see who was watching. You ever done that? And so if I made it, then I would look back, and they would all, you know, be, hey, great shot. I wanted some recognition. I wanted somebody to see what I was doing. You know, and that's one of the danger zones of service. You know, service can all of a sudden become more about us than it is about other people, and more than even it is about God and His kingdom. You know, we kind of get the like and the recognition. I even had a guy come forward one Sunday morning after a sermon, and he sat on the front pew, and I said, how can I help you today? He said, I would like to confess that I have been doing a lot of things around the church building so that I could get my name in the bulletin. And I thought, well, that's a pretty bold confession, that he just simply was honest, you know, that's been his motive. And so I got up and I did tell people. I told people that exact phrase that he used, because he was trying to confess the sin of selfishness, of wanting to be the center of attention even while doing good deeds. And that's the danger zone, again, that we can fall prey to, is it can become more about us than it is about others and about God's kingdom. So we have to make sure we humbly go about that to where nobody really recognizes us as being servants or being the ones that get our name in the bulletin, or people announce that this person did this. Now, every now and then that's going to happen. We always can't be anonymous, but our motive is really what we have to ask. Why am I doing this? Am I doing it for me, or am I doing it for God? And that's the big question. And so service is, again, something that we ought to go about as a lifestyle. One other thing that I can't help but tell you, I worked one summer at Kmart. Is Kmart still around here? They're not in Florence either. But back then, Kmart was the big deal. It's before Walmart really got cranked up. That's how old I am, I guess. But Kmart was the place, and I worked there in the stock room one summer between years of college. And so I was assigned the task of putting up all the merchandise when they brought in the big semi-trucks and unloaded it. And they bring in all kinds of things. They bring in gas grills and lawnmowers. They bring in toilet paper and detergent and all these things. And they would check it in. The ladies had the little scanners, and they would roll it down this conveyor belt, and then it came upstairs to me on another conveyor belt. And I had a room a little bit bigger than this auditorium to put it all in, with a conveyor belt that went all the way to the back wall. Well, just me by myself. They started sending all that stuff up there, and I would keep moving it so that they could say, you know, keep letting it come. You're making us, you know, get behind down here. So I would just kind of keep pushing it, put up what I could, make room. But eventually, they got to be faster than I did, and I got behind. And they couldn't put any more merchandise upstairs. And I was working, it was summertime, it's hot up there, I was sweating, I was moving boxes as quick as I could. And I looked, and at the top of the stairs, here comes the store manager, Mr. Clark. And I went, oh no, I'm about to get fired. I'm not working fast enough. He didn't say anything. He didn't even give me a dirty look or anything like that. This is what Mr. Clark did when he got to the top of those stairs. He looked back there at all the merchandise, and he looked at me. And he had a shirt on like this. He unbuttoned his sleeves and rolled them up. And he reached down and grabbed a box. put it over here. Grab the box and put it over here. And Mr. Clark, that store manager, worked about half an hour up there with me in that heat to catch up all that merchandise, to help put it up. And here I am at the bottom of the scale as far as employees. Here he is at the top. But you know, to this day, I'm still impressed with Mr. Clark because he was willing to serve, even though he had this position where he could tell everybody else what to do, but he was willing to be a servant. And I'll tell you, let me ask you this. Did he lose any status with me that day? Did I think less of him because he came up there and moved boxes as a store manager? No. His stock elevated in my mind because of what he did, because of his service. And folks, let's make sure we don't get caught up in that other trap that the disciples were in, was that if we somehow lower ourselves and we serve others, that we'll lose standing with everybody else around us. Because really, our stock goes up when we go down, when we serve, when we help. And so when you start thinking about service, again, the things that keep us from serving many times are our thoughts of what that would do to our life. And we fail to remember what Jesus says. That's really where true happiness is found, is in serving. And so as we think about Jesus and the way he went about it, he wants service that doesn't have to be noticed. He wants us to serve to where we don't have to have the recognition. Sometimes that's hard. There are times where other people will take credit for something we did. And a lot of times we want to say, hey, hold on there. I did that, you know. But it's not about who gets the credit, is it? It's about doing things that glorify God. As long as he gets the credit, that's all that matters. The last thing I want to leave with you tonight, Matthew chapter 25. I told you before, that's one of my favorite chapters. We've already talked about the parable of the talents, how the man that was given the 2 talents produced another 2. The 5-talent man produced another 5, that they went about serving their master with what they'd been given. Remember the 1-talent man, he just dug and hid it in the earth. He gave it back to his master upon his arrival. And do you remember what he said to those servants? And it's the same thing that he says at the end of the chapter to those who fed and clothed and visited those who are in need versus those who didn't. This was the bottom line. I want you to think about it from this standpoint. We all want to hear these same words too, by the way. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things, I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joys of your Lord. We all want to hear well done, don't we? But think about it this way. Well done, good and faithful what? Servant. And I want to submit this to you tonight. On that day, if you have not served in this life, Jesus is not going to call you something that you are not. If you're not a servant, then more than likely we're not going to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Because we have to serve in order for him to call us that. And we have to do well in that area as well to hear those words of commendation. Again, doesn't mean we have to be perfect, doesn't mean that we have to really work to get to heaven, but it does tell us that that's the expectation of those who go to heaven, that they're servants. And that's what he will call us on that day and welcome us if we have lived a life of service here. And again, what acts of service really make a difference? Is it the big mission trips or the big service projects? No. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Let me ask you this. Is there anybody in here that can't do those things? Can we not feed people who are hungry? Can we not clothe those who are in need of clothing? Can we not visit people who are in need of visiting? We can do all those things. That's not beyond our reach. That's not just for the more talented people in the church. It's for all of us. It may be that we visit over the phone if we can't physically get somewhere. It may mean that we write letters and notes and visit with people in that way. So there are different ways to visit. There are different ways to meet needs. But again, those are all things that we can do. And that's what Jesus is saying really matters, is those little acts of service that make a huge difference in the lives of those around us. And that's what's going to make a difference on Judgment Day. The only judgment scene we have is about the little acts of service that we do to one another, to those around us. And so, are we going to hear those words? Well done, good and faithful servant. Are we a servant? Does God consider me a servant tonight? And if not, then I have the opportunity to change. We had a guy that came and he's our pest control guy. He sprayed the church building today. He has not been there in about 4 or 5 months because he had a major health issue, and he was not expected to live. And he told me today when I got out of my car, he was about to leave, he said, I had 14 minutes that I was either going to meet God or meet the devil. And he said, I wasn't sure which one I was going to meet. And he said, I got a second opportunity at life. And he said, I made sure I knew from here on out who I was going to meet. He said, I'm now a baptized believer in Christ. And I said, amen. And I was so thankful to hear that he realized one day we are going to stand before God. One day we are going to be evaluated by how we've lived. And the question is, will He call me a servant? Will He call you a servant? And have we lived a life of service that pleases Him and brings honor and glory to His name? And so tonight, if we can help you with any spiritual need, if you need to become a Christian, we'd love to study with you and help you to that end. Or if we can help you to serve God more faithfully, we invite you to come right now as together we stand and sing.